Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going to start project 23 tonight. It's a transition joint where all sides are actually taping. Project 23 I can use in a bunch of different areas. Most commonly I use it when we maybe change out a furnace and we've got to transition one side of the ductwork to another side size, and you might have one side that has to transition or multiple sides that have to transition. So this one does it with all sides that taper. So let's move on. On the next page here we got just a little bit of write-up that goes along with the plan on this next page, talking about it. So you'll notice the perspective view number 6, you've got big to small, and then on the other side just the same, your big opening with your small opening, where all sides are actually transitioning there. And then they give you a working drawing, and then we finally get to our actual cutout dimensions. Plan 1 for the top, 2 for the bottom, 3 for the side, and 4 for the fourth side. So these are the important ones here on the plans. These last 4, I think they're the last 4 on the project there, is what we're going to use. Yes, they are. And so that being said, let's get right into it here. On these first two top and bottom patterns here, the first thing I did is I took a look at the drawing, and I noticed that in between my notch marks, my 3/4 inch notch marks, they've got a 7-inch distance figured here. So we're going to take that into account. 7 and 3/4 and 3/4 should add up, if I did my math right, 8.5. And that's what I did, is I went over and I cut myself a piece out of the bin that 8.5 width by whatever random length. So the next thing I'm going to do is start fabricating. On this top edge, we need a 7/8 area to run a dimension. So we need to be at least that far from the edge before we start our dimensions in between there. And then if you'll notice from the top to the bottom, there's a 1-inch difference on both sides. So it's going to transition from an 8-inch opening to a 6-inch opening on that part. So let's get that laid out next. I'm going to start with the left side. Set that aside for now. And we're going to just run a 7/8 mark, square it up down the edge, or if you like, you can even do the inch. But I'm going to go 7/8 tonight. Therefore, we got a square line that gives us enough distance off the edge of that part, and then we're going to make the transition come into play here in just a little bit. The next thing I'm going to do then is I'm going to run from my 7/8 mark down here, and I'm going to move in the transition of the inch. So move over 1 inch, and then I'm going to mark that 3/4 of an inch up off the sheet. So while I'm doing that there, I might as well take my 3/4 inch and run that line off the bottom of the sheet, and hopefully you can see this. I should be from the edge 1 inch and 7/8 off of that sheet, and it's very difficult to tell. That's where we're going to mark it, right there. And I'm just going to put a small little divot in there so you can see where we're coming from. Then I'm going to mark that 3/4 inch on the top side as well. And again, I'm going to put that 7/8 inch divot in there, that is off the edge of the sheet, so I know that's exactly where my measurements came from. Now let's take care of the 7/8 inch angle, or that take up. So I'm going to mark from my 2 divot points right on down the line there. That's going to give me the inside edge of my lock form, and then I'm going to measure 7/8 of an inch at that same angle out to the edge of the sheet here, at the top and the bottom there. And that should end out just about at that 3/4 inch mark, right where we measured our 7/8 from, if we did that right. So later on I'm going to cut that mark off there at the angle, and then the remaining 7/8 chunk there is going to be what's going to be run through the lock former. Again, most lock formers take up an inch, but this one's a 7/8. So let's measure over 8 inches. Right on that 3/4 inch edge. And that's going to give us this next distance over here. And again, I'm going to put a small divot in there, so hopefully you can see it a little better on camera. And then on the bottom, I'm going to measure over 6 inches for that next opening. Again, I'm on that 3/4 inch mark. And I'll try to put the divot there as well, so you can see that. And then I'll try to connect these dots. There. And then on this outer edge, we got to add an additional 7/8 of an inch on at that same angle. Alright, at this time I've got all my fabrication marks laid out. I'm going to take it up to the shear, and I'm going to cut this angle off and this angle off. Then we'll come back and we'll take care of the notching procedure. Okay, I got that set in the shear. Then I'm going to cut that angle off. That one's done. I got a 7/8 chunk remaining. Now I've got to cut it off of the other side and do the same thing. Okay, back at the bench, we're going to finish up the notching on those 3/4 inch marks. Three-quarter and 7/8 mark, rather, both of them. And with your tin snips, we'll just cut them off and set them back a little bit, a couple degrees. Alright, we'll run this one through the lock former then. And then we're going to come back and we're going to make the bottom panel. So this is the top, sitting like this. And the bottom is going to be sitting like that there. So the very, very similar project, just the base panel of it next. So let's run this through the lock former, and then we'll basically duplicate that one more time. Okay, here we are at the lock former, run through. Again, keeping it tight against the fence. And there we go. We should have our 6-inch opening down here and our 8-inch opening up here. Let's go make the other one. So at this point in time, this one's done. This can be run through, cut off, and run through the lock former after we get it notched. But for right now, I'm going to just flip to the next page and see if there might be enough room to fabricate up one of these other sides with the 1/4 inch pattern there, the 1/4 inch for the easy edger. So I'm probably going to work from the other side of the sheet. It says it needs a 10-inch opening plus an additional 1/4 on each side, so we're looking at about 10.5 inches, and there should be plenty of room to use a chunk of this on that section. So let's start with the top edge of the sheet there. Top edge and down the side, I'm going to mark a 1/4 inch take up for the easy edge. That way I've got enough of a distance on there when I run that. From the previous project, I've still got my 3/4 inch marks on the top and bottom, so that's ready to go. And it also says a 7-inch dimension in between those 3/4 inch marks. So you can see that is 7 inches, and that should work just fine. And then at the bottom, it says we're going to have a transition of a 2-inch offset over to the inner side of that mark. So let's measure that out and make that dimension there. So from the edge of the sheet, we're looking at 2 1/4 of an inch, 2 1/4 inch dimension there. And that's going to be our pivot point. From there up to here. I'm sorry, not our pivot point, our 2 marks for this angle. And then we've got to add on the additional 1/4 inch back onto that yet. So just pull it out to a random foot mark or an inch mark and add the additional 1/4 inch onto that, top and bottom. And again, with your straight edge, just put that mark on that sheet. Oop, come on. Again, it's going to come out right about at that 3/4 of an inch dimension there, and that's fine. Okay, from our points here to the other side on the top, if we look at the plan there, it says we need a 10-inch dimension from this point to that point, so let's measure that on next. So if I use the 12-inch mark, I'll set back to 2, and that will give me 10 inches in between there. Right there. And then the bottom, with the 2-inch transition there, 2-inch offset, whatever, we need 6 inches in between those marks. So from the 12-inch mark, we'll go to 6 inches there. And we'll make that dimension. The last thing is to add on the additional 1/4 inch. So again, just pulling the tape measure out, 1/4 inch on there. Top and the bottom. Okay, again, we're up to cutting this thing off with the shear, so I'm going to go back to my previous project, and then we're going to start with this one here, and we'll get them cut up. So let's run up to the shear and do that. finish notching them out then with just the standard 3/4 inch notcher. What we got in their hand, we'll do the same with the 1/4 inch sections here. All right, just about ready to run that one through the lock former to have basically the opposite pair of that. And this one here is ready to be fabricated, but I got to get one more piece of metal to finish the fourth side here. Okay, we got my piece of metal here. This should do it. I got something 8.5 inches that I cut, and we're about 11.5 inches long, so that'll get cut off in just a second here. So just like before, again, I need a 1/4 inch additional section on the side. So with my scribe there, 1/4 inch mark, 3/4 for the top and the bottom. Okay, last one, we'll run it up to the shear, and then we'll be ready to bend these last two up. And also while I'm up there, I'm going to put the last lock form on this other side as well of this one. So let's go. So as promised, we're going to shear it first. And then lock form the other one. Keeping it tight against the fence again. Make sure you lock form the 7/8 sides, not the 3/4 inch sides. Last thing we got to do is notch this other one back out, and we'll put it in the brake to put the bends on it. Here we go. Let's finish notching that last section out. The last thing to do on these last two drawings is to bend the 1/4 inch marks to a 90 degrees. So let's spin over to the brake and let's put those on there. Okay, there we have it, the last two parts. That's everything for the fabrication with that. But I want to go back here just a little bit, and we'll discuss the assembly. Again, if you notice on the assembly, from the perspective view, these aren't the same dimensions, but what you're looking at is the big to small dimensions there. on this project here, and they tried to do that in the working drawings as well, showing you the big with the small and the big with the small there. But basically this is what we're looking at. When we install it and hook this thing up, we need to have it the big opening with the small opening, like this here. And then to the next side again, just going right around the dimension there, the big opening to the small opening. And then keep rolling around the small opening with the big opening on here. Kind of like that. And I'll just kind of pop it together somewhat so you can see it right now. But previously when we left off, I just basically popped this thing together and said, well, good enough. So let's look at it here. Basically what we want to do is we want to make sure all the edges are lined up. And if they're not, kind of get them fitted so everything is smooth on both edges there and straight. And this one appears to be pretty decent. I kind of, you can push them around. But then, just like every other project, we're just going to start locking over those corners. Okay, that's going to wrap it up. So that's assembly. We'll talk to you later. Catch you on the next one.